Attention and Consciousness, Chapter 4. So here are some questions of interest. Can we actively process information even if we are not aware of doing so? If so, what do we process and how? What are some of the functions of attention? What are some theories cognitive psychologists have developed to explain attentional processes? And finally, what have cognitive psychologists learned about attention by studying the human brain? Okay, so first, the nature of attention and consciousness. Attention is the means by which we actively process a limited amount of information. So how does attention work? At any point in time, we perceive a lot of sensory information. Through attentional processes, which can be automatic or controlled, we filter out the information that is relevant to us and that we want to attend to. Eventually, this filtering leads to our taking action on the basis of the information we attended to. We need attention to filter out incoming information because even though the brain is only 2 to 3% of body weight, it consumes over 20% of oxygen we breathe. In other words, the brain is a very expensive organ to maintain. If the brain can save energy, it will do anything. If we process every single stimulus coming to our brain without sorting out using attention, it consumes significantly more energy than 20%. Four main functions of attention include signal detection and vigilance, search, selective attention, and divided attention. Let's take a look at each of the functions in the next several slides. Signal detection, finding important stimuli in a crowd. This is the matrix used in the signal detection theory. There are four possible outcomes. Hit means participant detects a signal when there is a signal. Miss means participant does not detect a signal when there is a signal. False alarm means participant detects a signal when there is no signal. And finally, correct rejection means participant does not detect a signal when there is no signal. Signal detection theory was one of the first theories to suggest an interaction between the physical sensation of a stimulus and the cognitive processes such as decision making. Let me give you an example. When you are listening to loud music with headphones at the library, someone calls your name, you barely hear it. That is a hit. If you didn't hear it, that's a miss. If you thought someone is talking to you, but when no one is talking to you, it's a false alarm. And finally, if you didn't think anyone is talking to you when no one is talking to you, that's a correct rejection. Okay, next. Vigilance is when you are attending to a set of stimuli over a length of time in order to detect a target signal. It decreases rapidly over time due to fatigue, thus misses and the false alarms increase. Next, search. There are two different types of search. In the following demonstration, you will be asked to actively search for a target that is different from the rest. So in the next slide, find a stimulus that is different from the rest. Ready? Pause the video here if needed to spot the different stimulus from the rest. I think that's not necessary because it's kind of obvious. Now I have another example. Find the stimulus that is different from the rest. Ready? This one is more difficult than the first one. So if you need, pause the video right now. Now the first one is called feature search or parallel search that uses pre-attentive process. In other words, target is defined by a single feature. This is also known as a pop-out effect. Attention is not required because the target can be identified simply by color. Second example, the one that you are seeing right now on the screen, is called conjunctive search because the target is defined by a conjunction of features shared with distractors. In other words, the target shares some features with distractors. Target is defined by two features which are shape and color, and search can stop only when the target is detected. This makes the search more difficult because you have to look at each of the stimulus and it is a serial search and attention is required. The way were you able to spot the one that is different from the rest? That is a red T that you can see at the bottom right-hand corner. Now, the difference between these two types of search is clear. This hypothetical graph depicts the number of targets and distractors influence reaction time. Because feature search is parallel search, no attention is required, and the number of sets does not affect reaction time. In contrast, conjunctive search requires attention, so as the number of set size increases, so does the reaction time. These two types of search, feature search and conjunctive search, are explained in the feature integration theory. Individual feature processing is done in parallel. Simultaneous processing is done on the whole display, and if feature is present, we detect it. Conjunctive search, on the other hand, requires attention to the integration of combination of the features. Attention to particular combination of features must be done sequentially to detect presence of the certain combination. This is why how fast you can detect it depends on the number of stimuli. Next, Treisman's feature integration theory. According to Treisman, feature search is the stage 1 and conjunction search is stage 2. We first analyze individual features of an object and subsequently integrate those features into the object. Similarity theory, on the other hand, proposes that how much targets and distractors are similar is more important than the number of features to be combined. Next, selective attention. Cocktail party phenomenon was first described by Cherry. He questioned how are we able to follow one conversation in the presence of other conversations. In his study, he used the dichotic listening task, which we discussed in Chapter 2. Cherry found that his participants noticed an unattended ear if gender of the speaker changed or a tone of the speech changed. In contrast, participants did not notice an unattended ear if language changed. They also noticed an unattended ear when the same speaker changed a topic or if speech was played backwards. Now let's take a look at theories of selective attention. The models differ in two ways. One is that whether or not they have distinct filter for incoming information. The second is that if the filter occurs early or late in the processing of information. Various mechanisms have been proposed suggesting a means by which incoming sensory information passes through the attentional system to reach high-level perceptual processes. In Broadbent's model, filter completely blocks out unattended information, therefore early filter, and only the attended message is forwarded to be processed. Selective filter model, on the other hand, participants still recognize names of unattended ear. So Moray hypothesized that messages of high importance may break filter of selective attention. In Treisman's model, an attenuator weakens the unattended message. It is still being forwarded in its weakened form, however, so that information of great significance can be picked up by the listener and subsequently can be processed. Broadbent's theory cannot explain the cocktail party phenomena, but Treisman's model can. Broadbent initially did not accept his theory needed modification, but as a scientific researcher, he eventually accepted Treisman's model. Treisman's attenuation model, instead of blocking stimuli out, the filter weakens the strength of stimuli other than the target stimulus. According to the late filter model, all stimuli are processed to the level of meaning, but relevance determines further processing and action. In other words, only relevant information is strong enough to break the filter to reach your consciousness. Okay, next, divided attention. Now, how many of you will say that you are good at multitasking? Now, research suggests that there is actually no true multitasking. Instead, when we think we are multitasking, the brain shifts our focus from one to the next very, very quickly. Of course, you can effectively execute multiple tasks when you are engaging in dissimilar tasks such as walking and listening to news at the same time. But if you engage in similar tasks such as reading a book while having a conversation with friends, one task interferes with the other. And this is one of the many reasons why you should not drive and text. Almost 80% of crashes, 65% of near crashes involved some form of driver inattention, within 3 seconds of the event. One study suggests that reaction time was doubled when texting and driving. Drivers were 11 times more likely to miss flashing lights. And you may say composing messages may be more dangerous than reading messages, but results suggest that both were equally dangerous. Texting drivers were less able to stay in their lane, and they were less able to maintain constant speed. So next, we will discuss a little bit about change blindness and inattentional blindness and spatial neglect. Change blindness is an inability to detect changes in objects or scenes that are being viewed. So you may not notice certain elements of an event changed over time, possibly because you are not aware of them. For example, traffic light may change from yellow to red, but you keep going into the intersection because you are not aware the light changed. Inattentional blindness is a phenomenon in which people are not able to see things that are actually there. Failure to notice something unexpected when your focus is tied with something else. Other than things you are aware of, everything else becomes background, therefore you fail to notice if there is any changes in the background. Next, spatial neglect. Parietal lobe is responsible for attention. What if this region is damaged? Damage in parietal lobe in one side of the brain causes a person to ignore half of their visual field. So patients fail to acknowledge that objects, events, or even time exist in the hemisphere opposite their lesion due to this unilateral parietal damage. This condition is called extinction. This exhibits the failure to perceive or respond to a stimulus contralateral to the lesion when presented simultaneously with a stimulus ipsilateral to the lesion. In other words, if the right hemisphere is damaged, you will fail to notice there is the world to your left. This is different from being blind. For example, this patient with spatial neglect syndrome is asked to imagine from his memory standing at the plaza he is well familiar with. When he is told to imagine standing the direction of north, he can only describe buildings that are in the right visual field, but not the left. When he is told to imagine turn 180 degrees, he now recognizes the buildings that he previously missed, but cannot recognize the buildings he was previously able to imagine. Next example is the artist who had severe stroke that left him with neglect. But as you can see, the portrait to the top left-hand corner, he worked on this art right after he was diagnosed with the spatial neglect. And as time goes by, he regained the world that he once lost. If the right hemisphere is damaged, the left visual field does not exist. So if this patient is asked to draw a clock, nothing exists in the left visual field. Line cancellations is one of the tasks to diagnose spatial neglect. Patients suffering from neglect are given a sheet of paper containing many horizontal lines and are asked to, under free viewing conditions, to bisect the lines precisely in the middle by placing a vertical line. For patients whose left visual field is gone, horizontal lines to the further left and tips of some of the lines do not exist. Okay, next. There are two types of processing: controlled processing and automatic processing. Automatic processing requires no conscious control, whereas controlled processing requires conscious control. You may think these two types are categorical, but they are rather the opposite ends of the spectrum. Think about when you first learn to drive a car. When you change the lane for the first time, you have to consciously remember to push down or lift up the turn signal depending on the direction you are going. Check whether there are cars nearby by using all the mirrors. Turn your head to directly look at where you are going. Slightly tilt the steering wheel, but be mentally ready to hit the brake just in case. But you cannot go too slow or too fast, etc. This is an example of controlled processing, but the changing the lane becomes more and more automatic as you are getting used to be driving. This process is called automatization. There are two theories to explain automatization. According to Anderson's integrated components theory, practice leads to integration. As you practice more, less attention is needed. Logan proposed instance theory, in which we retrieve information from memory-specific answers, so we skip the procedure. Therefore, less attention is needed. Now in the next slide, I will show you the strip effect. Your task is to say the color of the font as quickly as possible. Be sure not to read the word. Ready, set, go. Okay, it was easy, right? Now, next, I will display more, but the rule is identical. Say the color of the font and don't read the word. Ready, set, go. Now, if you're like most people, you will find it more difficult to perform the second task compared to the first one because you are more inclined to read the word instead of say the name of the color of the font. That is because your mind is trying to read the word, which is an automatic process, instead of trying to say the color of the font. Strip effect illustrates the visual selective attention. So what factors disrupt this type of attention? Researchers are interested if strip task performance will be impaired when participants are observed by an opposite sex. Heterosexual participants were randomly assigned to be observed by a male or female experimenter. And as you can see in this graph, men did significantly worse when they were observed by a female observer, but there was no significant difference in female participants. Authors offered an explanation that the men tried to impress the female observer, therefore their attention was divided. Women did equally well whether or not they were observed by either male or female observer. Now they conducted the second study. Second study was even more interesting. The design was identical to the first one, except for this time participants were told they were observed through the one-way mirror. Of course, there was no one behind the mirror, but men did worse when they thought a female observer was watching their performance. This means that attractiveness of the observer did not even matter. Women, again, didn't show any differences. These two studies suggest that attention can easily be disrupted, especially if you are heterosexual male. Okay, next, consciousness. In preconscious processing, information is available for cognitive processing, but that currently lies outside conscious awareness. So in the next couple slides, we will discuss priming, tip of the tongue or TOT phenomena, and blindsight. So priming. Priming can speed or slow processing. In facilitative priming, target stimuli are processed faster if preceded by a related word. In negative priming effect, target stimuli is processed slower if preceded by a word related to target's alternate meaning. Now I will show you a word one at a time to your right screen, and your task is to say the word as quickly as possible. Okay. Now, your reaction time will be fast for apple because the word fruit was shown immediately before it. Your reaction time would also be fast for banana because it was preceded by a related word, apple. But when you see an unrelated word such as pencil or tiger, because they are not related to the preceded word, you would slow down. Okay, next, tip of the tongue phenomena or TOT. In a TOT, you know the word, but you cannot fully retrieve the word. There are several paradigms used to generate TOT. One is to show pictures of famous people or politicians and have participants name them. Another task is to ask general knowledge questions to generate TOTs. This phenomenon seems to be universal. For example, bilingual people experience more TOT. They use one language more than the other, so it sometimes takes effort to retrieve information. Now, blind individuals who have lesions in some areas of the visual cortex may not consciously see a certain portion of the visual field, but still behave in some instances as if they can see it. In other words, they don't know that their brain actually perceives a visual input. If you are blind due to the damage in the visual cortex, you may still be able to manage walking across the room full of Lego blocks on the floor without stepping on them, even if you don't consciously see blocks. Okay, so that was the end of the slide of chapter 4. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.